So although some of us, maybe very rare of you, know what we actually want to do with our careers, with our lives, um, there's actually a lot of us who don't know at all, and it all changes as we grow up. And I feel like, me personally, growing up, people would always ask me like, hey, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? And it was never like the same answer. I feel like every year my family would ask me, it would always be like a different answer. And I feel like this is because as we grow through our childhood, through our teen years, and into our adulthood, we live or maybe experience different environments and different inspirations that kind of guide us towards what we actually want to be. So I want to start off with our childhood. I feel like as children, we're very big observers, and we like to observe what we view around us, like our parents, or maybe even like when we go to the doctors, or going on a field trip to a fire station, or maybe even just playing with our dogs. I feel like this is very inspiring to us as children as to maybe what we want to be when we grow up. But I feel like we as children don't really pay attention to the other aspects that come with that certain career. We don't even know what a career is. We just know that that's something we want to be because we look up to it. Like for example, I remember when I was little, I would always go to my best friend's house, and we'd always play pretend. And two of the main things I would love playing was cashier and teacher. And I would always tell my mom I want to be a cashier when I grow older. Obviously now I realize that that's not the best option, and it's not really a goal. But all I knew as a child is that I liked pressing buttons, and I liked playing with the money and like attending people. And I also wanted to be a teacher because in elementary I loved reading. I loved being a part of the class. I was basically at one point a teacher's pet. So when I would play with my best friend, I'd love using like a little pointer with a little stick. And but then I realized I'm not so good at math. It's not my thing. I had an opportunity in high school when my child development class for ROP to be a TA in a first grade class. And I love children. I have 7 nieces and nephews, but I feel like I just didn't like the responsibility that came along with all the children, and like they all depend on you all at once. As teens, I feel like it's a totally different environment. I feel like you're inspired by a totally different set of things. Like maybe when you join a dance group or a cheerleading group or maybe like a soccer team, and then you think to yourself like, oh, I want to be a professional dancer, I want to be a professional soccer player. But a lot of these things are looked down upon by like parents and adults because they're not the easiest things to achieve. It may take a while. I have a friend named Justin. He was in cheerleading and dance for all 4 years, and he was really good. He was like the star of the show in every assembly. And he always said he wanted to be either a coach or like a professional dancer or something. But that didn't go as planned because his parents told him that basically it was 50-50. It wasn't going to be easy to achieve that career. Which leads me to my next point. As an adult, you're kind of forced to think more logically as to what you want to do, money-wise, because some of these things don't bring a lot of money to the table. For example, I like doing makeup, and I like the whole art aspect of it, but it's not really enough to, raise a family or like buy a house, for your children or stuff like that. I feel like as a single person who like still lives in their parents' house and like goes to school, doesn't do anything else, it's good money, but it's not enough. So that's why I choose to be a dental hygienist, because I like going to the dentist. I'm pretty infatuated with like straight teeth, so I got braces. And every time I go, I don't fear it. I love being there. And it brings pretty good money. I feel like it'd be, enough to like buy a car, buy a house, and like provide for my future family. So I feel like a lot of these things change when we're children, when we're teens, and into our adulthood.
Well, I like the shared uncertainty about what you're going to do with your life at the beginning. A lot of people go through those problems, and I like the way you kind of tied that into a thing that you're going to be talking about. It's a sort of a generic subject matter, and it's okay. I do think you need to have a more specific goal in mind, and there's not really any preview or layout of what the structure is going to be. It's kind of chronological because you're starting with when you were a small child and what kind of things might influence you then, and then you move on to later situations, and then you've got a personal, practical experience about the choice that you've made. So it feels like there is a structure to it that's chronological in nature, but it's not something that you've laid out for the audience, and I think that we would be easy to be able to pick up on until kind of you look at it holistically. And then like I said, looking back, it's a little bit easier to pick those things out. The content is all personal experience. I think a little research would probably help. The personal experiences are interesting. It does make it feel a lot more like it's an impromptu sort of exercise rather than a prepared sort of exercise, even though you do have things that you have integrated into the speech that you did prepare. The visuals were okay, for instance. They kind of remind us of some of the things that you're talking about. I like the idea at the first that we're, as kids, we're influenced by the things that we see around us that we admire and that we like. As, firefighter or dog trainer. I'm not exactly sure which one of those things would apply to most people. I like there's a lot of stuff that is personal in nature that I appreciate you're putting into the speech. I do think, though, that you sometimes need to either explain more about the personal things, like why you like going to the dentist, or what other considerations might be for people who have to make those choices. Like when you're talking about makeup is something that you're interested in, but you don't really see it as something that's going to be able to sustain you, a family, lead a life on that. There are people who do that, so why is it that you don't see it that way? That's when some of that information would be necessary. Like, what does the average person make in that particular field? What kinds of things do you have to do? What kinds of time commitments are there to have a success? What's required? That kind of thing. You got to be the head honcho at Mary Kay in order to be able to get someplace in life doing those sorts of things, or you got to be the head of the department at the studio in order to be able to make enough money to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be somebody who helps folks out and earns a little bit of extra cash on that, but it's not really a career kind of thing, which is why something else that you might be interested in would be an appropriate choice that can sustain you. Here's an example that worked for me. What other kinds of examples could work for other people? Like I said, to make it maybe a little bit more universal. I think that would probably be a good thing when it comes to the content. Presentation, a lot of things are really solid. I think I like the way that you kind of smiled to yourself and to us when you're talking about your own experiences, what you wanted to pretend when you were a kid, being the teacher with the pointer, or what was the other one? I'm trying to remember. It was right there on the tip. I'm an old guy. I forget things that I just heard a second ago.
The cashier.
the cashier, that was it, pushing the buttons on the cash register thing, that sort of thing. I kind of like that. You know, I know kids like to play and pretend and that sort of thing, and I kind of like the way that you sort of smiled about that and not quite acted it out, but you know, you kind of reminded us what's going on in those particular situations, and so you seem engaged when you're talking about that, and it does feel like you're talking to us for the most part because you generally look at us. But when you do look down, it's mostly transition stuff. It feels like you've gotten to the end of an idea or a sentence, and then you kind of drop your eyes thinking about the next thing that you're saying. But you usually look right back up at us, and so I didn't really feel like you were disengaging. It was just that momentary thought where you getting to the next point. So I thought you did a pretty good job on the visual things. The one thing that I thought was probably a little problematic, you have a tendency to rock back and forth on your feet, and because you're standing in the same spot the whole time, that makes it seem more obvious. This would be one of those places where if you're walking the transitions and move your spot as you're talking, it'll probably feel a little bit less like you need to do that, and when you do it, it won't seem as noticeable because you're in a different spot, and it'll seem more naturalistic that you're just kind of adjusting to being into a new spot rather than, you know, rocking back and forth on your feet like I was talking about. Your voice, I think it's easy to hear you. There's good variety in your voice. There were a few ums here and there. I didn't think that it's disastrous. Most people are going to have a moment or two of hesitation when they're trying to think about the next thing that comes up and they haven't really got every word written out in front of them. There's going to be momentary hesitancies. You'll notice that. That's the way that you fix those things. When you notice it, you say, I need to fix that and practice on it a little bit more. All right, thank you.